So the Pro-Am has passed the first week and it was pretty exciting. We had some upsets, some really accelerating games, and got to see the contender teams in action. How did they do? Let's jump in. We'll start with the Reign, who had a dominant weekend, going 2-0 against all of their opponents. These guys look ridiculous. Lip is just as dominant as we remember. The amount of first picks he got, times he ended fights before it started with a headshot, and his Sombra is back as he farmed EMP on cooldown and consistently got huge value with her. Soccer is incredible on the main Tracer. Donghack played surprisingly well despite being on ping, and Hawk, Vigilante, Chio, and Fielder play as well as we expected them to. They look absolutely insane on a wide variety of comps. It's really uncoordination with Soccer and Fielder especially, but Chio having really clutch boops to set up the team as well. But there are a few caveats here I want to talk about. The biggest asterisk is that obviously the Reign did not have a tough group whatsoever. Vegas has been awful basically since the start of Season 5, and are not impressive whatsoever. Valiant are also full of the same caliber players as Vegas and just got together like a week ago, and Saints and London look decent, but their players just aren't on the same caliber. Reign just mechanicked their way through the weekend, even if they did look mighty impressive. As for some player stuff, it's pretty small, but Chio and Vigilante often had positional issues where they went too far in or overstayed their welcome and were punished. Hog's Sumatra ults were pretty bad, and he wasn't on the same page as the rest of the team quite a few times. But overall, this team looks really well-rounded and dominant. I'm excited to see them play. Next up, the Florida Mayhem. They honestly look incredible. Someone is absolutely dominant on the Winston, getting countless multi-kills every fight. He's incredible, and his primal mechanics are insanity. He's even showing his stuff with the Ramatra and Sigma. Incredible player. Charring is really impressive as well, having amazing peel, great boops, and honestly, his Ana seems to really pop off. I actually think it's better than RuPaul's. He's going absolutely off, and I think he can make a break for Rollstar contention if Florida keep up their performance. Checkpoint is also coming into his own a lot, and his Tracer seems greatly improved from last year. Merit, dude's pretty cracked, but I thought he was gapped by Inspire and Proper at points, and he didn't impress me a ton. And I think the duo of someone in Checkpoint is also really dominant and creating a ton of space for him to work. But he is still definitely outstanding and proving to be a great addition to his team. He's not bad at all. His Cassidy especially is pretty nasty. Then RuPaul he was alright. Nothing crazy again, but he was solid. I wasn't a huge fan of his Kiriko. He had some really late Suzus, but he got some wild things. I'm not going to rag on the guy too much though. His Ana was really good, and he played really well overall. On a macro level, they seem to really understand the dive comp and are probably the best dive team so far, but they kind of rely on it a ton. They pull out their Ramatra comp against Trick Room, but that's Trick Room. I have no doubt that they can pop off on the comp, but they don't seem as multifaceted as the Reign. I think it's something for them to work on before they are considered a true contender for first and Pro-Am. Next up, we have the London Spitfire. I'll be honest, I wasn't too happy with the performance I saw out of these guys. I'll start with the coaching staff. Sparker was a fucking beast all weekend, going super hard on Cassidy and Hanzo and bailing out the Spitfire multiple times in multiple series. Admiral was consistently really good on the Lucio, zero complaints about his play. Landon was consistent on the BAP too, but the rest, I don't know. Lethal and Skyrip would not live up to the hype really, though it was only one map. Lethal was mostly on Tracer, and he was just on a different page from the rest of the team most of the time, playing really slow and reactionary. Skyrippa had an alright on it, and seems to be what he'll come into play mostly, but he was tragic on Zen. Meanwhile, Hottie underwhelmed. He definitely had some good showings on the Ryan and Monkey, but his Monkey is nothing really to write home about, and I kinda thought he got dipped by Mikey on it. And his Ryan was underwhelming as well. It was good, but he got diffed by Vulcan. Overall, these guys look nasty and a pretty promising team, but I think they're gapped in most roles by other top teams and are relying too much on the suboptimal meta comp and Sparker to carry them. Next up, the San Francisco Shock. Let's just address the elephant in the room. Shock lost to Trick Room. This proves that NA contenders outclasses Korean contenders, and I am hyped to see Boat join Vegas and become the next MVP, Rookie of the Year, and Rollstar after dipping Proper. No, but seriously, yeah, that series was a mess. I think Shock really just underestimated Trick Room, and Trick Room punched up significantly. That mixed with two C9s really solidified. I think they were caught off guard and played too reactionary, as well as forcing the D.Va for some reason, but overall, they didn't have the worst weekend if you write that off as a funny. They played Florida very close, and one fight going differently on Nepal would have Shock winning 2-0. And they beat Timeless and especially Titans pretty easily. All this despite being in different locations and being on nearly 200 ping. But let's talk about the players. We've done it to death already, but we gotta talk about Proper, because holy shit, this dude is a freak in nature. Nearly unplayable ping issues, waking up in the middle of the night, and he still manages to match and even outperform Merit on the hit scan, and solo carry teamfight after teamfight on the Tracer. It's fucking absurd. Proper is still probably the best player in the world by a large margin. He just takes over matches on an unheard of level so consistently. But what about the rookies? Heesang looked good in my opinion. Obviously he was overshone by Proper, but his Tracer was pretty solid. especially considering the ping, and synergized well with Jinbin. His Hanzo was amazing too. I think his main Sombra could definitely use some work, but he did look better by the end of the week. His Sombra was especially pretty clutch. I wasn't too underwhelmed with him considering the circumstances, but he really isn't proper, man. Jinbin and Max were solid as well. Jinbin especially synergized super well with the rest of the team, as Winston, Ball, and Doom were fantastic throughout the weekend. Max is interesting. He went negative across the weekend, but I don't think he looked bad. I honestly think Max is a better Ram than Jinbin, and his Diva was pretty nasty too. But he just seemed to be thrown in randomly when they only want to run Ram, and like a random tiebreaker map to play Winston. His Winston isn't awful, but that was a throw considering how Jinbin was performing, and Shock was hard forcing Diva for some reason against Trick Room. Max looked good when he was in. His Ram was great and his Diva was pounding, but the comp choices are just not as good for the Shock. And Diva is very off meta and doesn't really fit in with the comp. The Jinbin mirror would have been much better. My only complaint is that he can be greedy, especially with his Ramat rolls. He gets caught out of position a lot. Vindame definitely had some synergy issues going into the week, but he sorted them out a lot by the Titans game. Though, yes, he was kind of feeding in the Florida game. And Finn also looked way better, hitting some really nice shots and nades on the Ana, but I wasn't super impressed by his Kiriko, even though he did get some really good dinks in. And on a macro level, it seems like they really understand the dive comp especially. I think Heesang needs to work on his walls in May a bit, but they're good enough on the Ram comp to be well-rounded. But sadly, their first opponent in the tournament seems to be Houston, and I'm not expecting much unless they can get to NA this week and get off ping. And it's a pretty tall order, even if circumstances were good. Godspeed. Next up, we have the Vancouver Titans. These guys honestly impressed me quite a bit, despite not being able to qualify for the tournament. Let's start with the good. Punk was really good and flexible this weekend. I thought he was way better than expected on the Winston Wrecking Ball especially, and was pretty solid on the Ram, though he got outperformed by Jinbin. Sugar Free was popping off with the Tracer, and Crimzo was really strong in the Bab and Ana, I thought, even managing to keep proper in check a few times. And overall, their rush comp isn't that bad. Aspire's cracked down on the Hanzo, and in general, they have a better understanding of the win cons. Faith, also very underrated. His Ana and Brig were really strong. Now, on to the bad stuff. The dive is not as great as it could be. The rotations were really slow, and they can get punished for not taking tougher dives, especially on the ball comps. We saw Florida, and especially Shock, run circles around them due to their superior macro and rotations. Aspire was great and had a lot of good moments, but I was not very impressed with his Cassidy. And his Sombra, we will not even talk about. He somehow managed to keep getting picked off first, like, bro, how? Even his Hanzo got gapped by Web a bit. Underwhelming, but I still think he's a great player. Sugar Free is good, but he falls off when he's on the Tracer, who is by far his best hero. Yeah, he's really strong at the Tracer, but his May was not as impressive to me, and they forced that, and then he still wasn't a match for the 180 ping Warrior proper, and Punk definitely didn't look incredible on the main tanks, even if he was stronger than expected. Overall, there still tragically seems to be a sizable talent and coaching gap between them and the top teams, but they still played very well and better than I expected. Next up, finally a contender team, Saints. They honestly played fairly well, considering their status as a contenders team. Again, we'll start with the good. Mikey and King are still great. Mikey often looked like the best player on the team on the Winston Ball, and King was really impressive on the Sombra and Tracer. He hard carried a lot of matches. Tree and Vega had their moments, and Squid impressed me a lot for being an emergency signing. He dinked tons of heads and came up clutch multiple times. He's honestly pretty crazy on the Kiriko. Now onto the bad. A lot of it comes down to the lack of coaching. They did a pretty decent macro throughout as they played on the patch for longer, but the individual decision making was kind of all over the place. They often split up easily and weren't as synergized as the other teams, relying on mechanical diffs. As for the players, Tree shined a lot, but it was very feast or famine, either taking over the lobby or not doing very much, which I don't think is like him at all. And Vega, while showing individual shining moments, was still caught out of position way too often and way too early. Overall, this team had a good run considering. They beat both basically NA contenders Owl teams, and made London sweat, though I was hoping for them to make it into the Pro-Am. But they really showed off who they were. By far the most mechanically gifted Tier 2 roster in the West, with names that'll probably be big in the Western talent pool for years to come. Next up, the Los Angeles Valiant. Weird as it is to say, I didn't think these guys were bad at all. They had a lot of good stuff. Seeker was cracked all weekend. He absolutely carried Valiant through many games on many different heroes. He's fucking crazy. Liar, I thought, was very solid in the Lucio, though his Flux supports were more quiet. And they were pretty solid in their Matra comps, but really they did not have a great showing. And 2S and CJ were extremely feast or famine. They had good showings against Paris and Saints, but fed their brains out against London, where only Seeker looked like he showed up to play. Crowley was solid in the Ramatra, but he seemed to refuse to play anything else, and wasn't even particularly good at the Ramatra in my opinion. Hawk was rolling him. And the lack of practice was a bit clear, sadly. Their macro was all over the place, with Nos going in for a bit too many hero plays for my liking, and their ult rotation often came down to ult until you win the fight. Not very great stuff, but the Valiant looked competitive and easily better than Vegas, which, while not a compliment, was up in the air before this weekend, and they'll continue to improve as the season approaches. Next up, Timeless. I really was impressed by these guys, honestly. I thought they were much better compared to how they performed in the Pro-Am tournament. They had a good understanding of the macro, with good rotations, punishing the other team, pretty good map control. Kuffa and Wub were the stars here. Kuffa was honestly absurd. He was easily the star of the team, having crazy good performances on the Winston and Ramatra, and was the main reason for their success. And Wub and Cal had some really good moments. That Wub 4K on Hanzo to clutch up Kings Row versus Vancouver was sublime. But ultimately, it's honestly just kind of a skill issue, sadly. Doomed isn't proper, Checkmate is sugar-free, Wub isn't Merit or Heesang. Despite their pretty impressive macro, they got gapped in most roles by these superstars. Could they be developed into owl-ready players by good coaches? Sure, but they just aren't at that level yet. Next up, Trick Room. Yeah, these guys. I know they beat Shock, yada, but they just, aren't a good team. It's kind of hard to describe. But I feel like these guys rely on their enemy to play a much slower tempo than them and be overwhelmed. They don't have much good talent in their roster individually. Boat is alright. In fact, it is actually pretty good. And I like Pummy from Trials, but he didn't impress in the real thing. But they even get diffed individually by, Timeless. But what this team is good at is capitalizing on mistakes. So when Shock come in and look lost on 200 ping, playing overly defensively, they take advantage and can clutch out the match. Timeless tries to force a ram comp on Hollywood where dive looks like the stronger meta. Trick Room can prevent them from touching. But against Florida Titans and Timeless otherwise, they're helpless. They're just a really weird team. They were fun to watch though. These aren't highly rated players, so to watch them go on a miracle run to the NA Pro-Am bracket and even beat the San Francisco fucking Shock was fun. I really do wish them the best. Last but not least, the Vegas Eternal. They look awful, horrible, horrific even. They won a single map in the easiest group stage of them all. Now, let's start with a few good parts. Dove is still crazy on almost all hit scan picks, and Tracer. He was consistently carrying this team to the few fight wins they wound up getting. Vulcan looked quite good on the Sigma, and even diffed Hottie on Rhine, which gives me some hope in his flexibility. But dear god, Mouthful predictably looked awful, getting hard F by every other flex CPS other than Backbone on Sombra. His Genji, Pharah, and Tracer looked really poor, especially the ults, and don't even get me started on his Reaper. Vulcan was decent on his comfort picks, but he was not forcing any rotations and was bullied most of the time. He did a horrible job shutting down Merit on the D.Va. Lucamino was more or less the same. Very clear communication issues as well. They really look like 5 players solo queuing, hoping to win a map. There are no set plays, no hints of communication, no clutch plays from the supports. They really just want to clutch defeat from the jaws of victory. And with that, that's week 1 of the Pro-Am in the history books. Definitely a lot of great games I want to VOD review at some point. I think teams had some good showings. Shock underperformed a lot, but did pretty well considering their awful ping. And I thought Valiant and Titans had good showings. Vegas seems like the clear bottom dog in NA though. Excited for next week. Thanks for watching.